There are quiet kinds of pain no one teaches us how to name, some where the wound isn't loud or sharp, just ... lingering, like the weight of something we forgot we were carrying, until we felt ourselves finally lay it down. And the curious thing is, sometimes it's not people who help us set it down. Sometimes it's the soft press of a furred body, the dark, patient eyes of something wordless, something watching, in a world that speaks too much and listens too little. There are companions who've chosen the reverse. This isn't a story about heroics, not the kind with roaring climaxes or soaring triumph. This is a story about listening and about the horse who did. Some of us break loudly, and some of us splinter in silence, but either way, someone is always watching. Perhaps not to judge or repair, just to witness. They say healing comes from being seen, believed. But what about the wounds too strange to speak aloud? The kind that twist inward, the kind that make you forget what it sounded like to be okay. There are moments when grief isn't a storm, but a fog, not a shatter, but a thinning. And it takes someone walking beside us in that stillness too. Remind us we're still here. This is a story pulled from hay-dusted stalls and snow-lit hillsides, from hooves that no longer gallop, but still carry, from scars that didn't vanish, but softened. He didn't come with lineage, nor records. No one knew his name when they unloaded him off the trailer. They just saw the head bowed low, one ear half torn, coat dulled with neglect. He didn't snarl, he didn't kick, he just ... stood there, as if waiting for the next thing to leave him. The woman who saw him first on that cold March morning, she didn't say much either, just walked quietly beside him. He looks like he's been apologizing his whole life, she whispered. They gave him a name anyway. Chance. It wasn't meant to be special. She just thought maybe someone once in his life needed to believe he still had one. Because sometimes, if no one speaks tenderness to you, your body forgets how to receive it. And no, he didn't respond the first day, or the second, or the 20th. But he didn't shut his eyes when someone passed anymore. And sometimes, that's how it starts. Ask anyone who spent time at the edges of anguish. It's not grand gestures that lift us. It's someone who simply stays near, long enough for the ache to unclench. Animals, perhaps more than humans, have learned not to interrupt. And in this story, silence did more healing than words ever could, because Chance wasn't just a horse that needed rescuing. He became something else entirely, something people didn't quite have a name for, but the quiet ones recognized it instantly, especially a girl named Emma. And if you follow his hoofprints long enough, the ones still pressed into the Colorado dust, you might just hear what he heard, even when we couldn't say it, and maybe you'll be able to say it too. He didn't always flinch at a shadow. Once, there was movement in him, promise, even a colt with clean legs and a gleaming auburn coat, raised on soft prairie grass and high hopes. No one remembers the exact ranch or the hands that first touched him. Maybe they had plans, maybe they didn't, but at some point, the plans ended, and someone stopped showing up. Neglect doesn't announce itself all at once. It creeps. A day without brushing, a week without feed, a cracked hoof overlooked, a cut that opens and isn't treated. Eventually, there's a shift, not just in body, but in belief that no one's coming. No one ever says when a life becomes disposable, but the signs are easy enough to read. Overgrown hooves, rank mats, dullness in the eyes, and the papers stop following the body. He is sold, not for his breeding, but for his weight. The places he goes next don't leave records, only bruises. In the kill lot, he didn't scream. That surprised some of the workers. The loud ones are wanted. They fight, rage, give you something to blame. But this one just folded, stood cornered in holding, looking beyond the fences like he'd already left. He had no brand, no halter, no name, just a tag punched onto his side like luggage, misplaced on the way to nowhere. The kind of tag you don't write on with a pen. It's printed terse, designed for numbers, not stories. The others came and went. Some hauled to auctions, others to the trucks that didn't come back. He stood for weeks in churned mud and ammonia air, ate what he was given, flinched when someone touched behind his left flank, and still no one remembered where he'd come from. There's a term that gets thrown around in those circles, shut down. Means a horse isn't wild, isn't fighty, isn't even sad. They've just stopped reacting. Like grief that's been forgotten so long, it dries out, becomes dust. In the wretched symmetry of places like that, even mercy becomes mechanical. A rescue group from Colorado scanned the pens one morning, not looking for soul pens, just those still well enough to travel. A volunteer walked past him and noticed something. He keeps watching the emptiest corner of the lot, she remarked, like he's waiting for something that left that way. They didn't have space for him, not really. 37 were already being packed for transport, and yet, later, no one could quite recall who added him to the manifest. Just that when they pulled out, he was standing in the back row, silent, present, somehow impossible to leave behind. Sometimes, the forgotten make themselves unforgettable, simply by still being there. That was how he arrived in Colorado, not as a miracle, not as a mission, just ... extra. And afterward, if anyone asked his story, the rescue team could only shrug. We don't know what he lived through, they'd say. But whatever it was, he doesn't ask for much now. Just space. Pain leaves traces, even when we can't name them. A bowed head that doesn't lift when feed arrives. Twitching skin when a hand hovers too near. The refusal to look anyone in the eye, no matter how softly they call. He didn't bite. He didn't rear, he just stood, a horse-shaped silence, shaped by every place that had passed him through without asking why he moved like that. No one gave a name to the wounds, so the wounds named him instead. Not worth it, too small to race, too broken to ride, too quiet to command affection. We build whole worlds around those judgments. But what no one accounted for, what none of the numbers showed, was what still pressed behind his eyes. Something folded, but not erased. Something that would take one more chance to unfold. The sun sat low over Sunrise Meadows Rescue Ranch, painting every wooden beam and weathered fence in gold. The quiet there was not empty, but textured, the kind of silence that holds its breath around broken things. Joanne was not the first to walk out to the paddock that morning, and she wouldn't be the last. But when she saw him, the horse they hadn't planned for, standing just inside the gate like he'd forgotten how to enter, something inside her stopped. She didn't speak, didn't call for help, just ... stood still. And he did too. It wasn't fear she saw in him. It was something colder, quieter. He wasn't resisting. He just wasn't arriving. She took one slow step forward, breath visible in the mountain chill. "You're here now," she murmured, mostly to herself, And he didn't blink. For the first 3 days, he stayed at the far corner of the holding corral, facing away. They tried carrots, oats, a name. He didn't respond to any of them. He wasn't defiant, just absent. The way an abandoned house doesn't protest its emptiness, it just echoes, Joanne called the vet. Just routine, she said. He'd arrived with the others, but he was weighing heavily on her mind. The vet was careful. Checked vitals, scanned wounds, looked at the way he flinched when her sleeve brushed his side. He's not sick, she said. Just ... shut down, probably from a lot more than what's visible. Joanne nodded. She'd seen this before, but something felt different with him. In the logbook, she wrote just one word beside his intake number: Chance, not in sweeping calligraphy or pastel ink. Just a ballpoint scribble. But it stayed. Because you have to call something by a name before it ever considers coming back to life. She cleaned the stall herself, found an old fleece blanket to lay in the corner, where he'd barely touched the hay. Spoke softly near him each time she passed. Not to coax, just so he'd know what a voice could sound like when it didn't want anything. And slowly, nearly imperceptibly, his body began to unfreeze. Not in leaps, but in tiny allowances. He started watching the barn cats, turned an ear when someone whistled down the corridor. He'd still recoil from sudden movements, but there were glimmers. There was no breakthrough moment, no montage, just days accumulating, one after another, with no new pain in them. Every night, a volunteer brought a flashlight through the aisles, made sure water was clean, feed untouched, blankets not trampled, and every night, Chance stood upright in the same position, as if sleeping might pull him under too far to return. By the 3rd week, he had stopped, facing the back corner. By the 4th, he allowed a brush to run gently along his shoulder. For 2 full strokes, Joanne didn't cheer. She didn't make a note in the book. She just looked at him and offered half a smile. For the first time, he flicked an ear her direction. One afternoon, when a group of visiting school kids came with their teacher, everyone stayed near the mini horses or the friendly mustangs. All but one, a little boy, maybe 5, wandered over to Chance's pen without a word. He didn't touch him, just stared. Chance stared back. No flared nostrils, no step back. Their stillness was quiet, but oddly electric. Then, with startled wonder, Joanne saw something she hadn't before. The horse's tail lifted slightly, then relaxed, like the tiniest exhale. The boy's teacher called him away, but Chance didn't turn his face. That night, Joanne sat on the edge of his stall gate after the lights dimmed. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. "You were the first one too." In that dim light, Chance took a slow step forward. Not a glide, not a charge, just one hoof ahead of the other. He didn't come to the gate, didn't touch her hand. He simply didn't turn away. And in this place, in this world, that was monumental. When the vet returned a few days later for checkups, she waved her stethoscope toward his stall. "Still, your quiet one." "He's quieter," Joanne nodded. "But not gone." The vet took a moment, then, almost reluctantly said, "You know, emotional shutdown like this, it doesn't always come back. Sometimes they live out peacefully, but never engage. You're giving him safety. That might be all you can give." Joanne didn't disagree, but later, that night, she left her sandwich near the store bars. It was untouched when she closed up, gone when she came back with the morning light. A day later, an apple vanished too, taken without sound. Sometimes, What we offer without expectation is what creates the very space healing asks for. And somewhere at the back of his stall, beneath straw and shadow, a horse without a name began, tentatively, to remember he's still here. The first time Emma saw the horse, she didn't say anything. But then again, she hadn't said anything in a long time. She stood near the fence line, fingers curled into her sleeves, letting the cold breeze push the strands of her hair across her cheek. The other children were already scattered across the paddocks, brushing curious ponies, feeding sugar cubes to calm geldings. A therapist crouched beside her, soft-voiced. "You can go see them," she said gently. "You don't have to talk." Emma didn't move. She just looked, not at the ponies or the others, but toward the opposite corner where a tall, unmoving shape stood. A horse that wasn't being approached. One that didn't seem to ask. And that, more than anything, made her take a step forward. Chance didn't lift his head, but his eyes followed. That was how it began, in silence. A gull, hollowed out by loss, and a horse too used to it to startle. The tragedy that brought her there didn't take place in one moment, the way people thought. Some griefs are sudden, a slammed door, a snapped thread. But hers was more like a story that had its ending torn away. Her older brother, the only person who could read her silences like they were fluent, the one who once taught her how to skip rocks in silence because sometimes the water understands better than people. He had taken his own life 4 months earlier, and ever since, Emma had not spoken. Not out of anger, but out of something deeper. Language had stopped fitting after that day. At first, her parents called it a phase. Then the school counselor called in specialists. Then they found Sunrise Meadows. No promises were made there. Just possibilities. When she saw Chance, no words came. But something like stillness did. The next visit, she walked past the other horses again, all the way down to his enclosure, sat cross-legged in the straw about 5 feet from the bars, and stayed that way for half an hour. Therapists took notes. Joanne watched from a distance. No movement was forced. Animals, after all, had no need for timelines. The 4th time she came, she brought something, an apple. Green, crisp. She walked carefully, placed it inside the stall near the side, backed away. Chance didn't approach immediately. He looked at her, then the apple, then back again. He left it there the first day. The second, on the third, after she laid it down and retreated to her spot, something changed. A slow step, then another. He reached it, nosed it. 8. Emma didn't react, just folded her knees to her chest and rested her chin there, watching. But on her face, the kind of smile that arrives like dawn, subtle, certain, and never forced. She still hadn't spoken. But one of the therapists wept quietly in her car that day. There's a kind of recognition that lives between two creatures who've learned how to live without expecting kindness. Each week, Emma returned. Each week she sat. Sometimes she brought an apple. Other times, she just brought herself. The other children were starting to form bonds with various animals. Some brushed coats, others led short walks. But Emma stayed near Chance, and Chance, oddly, seemed to wait for her. He never relented with the others the same way. Volunteers noticed how he shifted when she arrived, not dramatically, but consistently. His head would tilt toward the main entry trail. His ears followed her footsteps. By the 3rd month, she reached her hand toward him. Didn't make contact, just let it hover, and he stepped forward. Let the space between them shrink. The touch came on a rainy morning, a hesitant palm to the side of his face. Not long, not firm, but when her hand dropped, she didn't pull back. She stayed close. Afterward, she sat and traced circles into the dirt beside her legs. Later that day, Joanne found the circles. She didn't erase them. "Do you think he knows?" a new program volunteer once asked. "Like about the girl?" Joanne nodded, slow and certain. "Not the facts," she said. "But he knows the rhythm of grief. That's hard to fake, harder to hide." They didn't assign Emma to chance officially, but everyone knew. Even the other children had begun calling him her horse. Not possessively, more like reverently. By the 6th month, Emma brought a book, sat beside the stall and opened it. When no one came near, she began to read. Her voice was raspy from disuse, shaky, but each word found its way out. She read slowly, a children's novel, the kind her brother once read aloud in their shared room before bed. Chance didn't understand the words, but he stayed standing, close to the bars, the way he always did with her. The only one he did with anyone. Later, when staff asked if she wanted to ride one of the horses, someone safe, gentle, well-trained, she shook her head, and after a long pause, barely above a whisper, she offered her first spoken sentence to a human since the day they'd lost him. "I'd rather just read to him. I think he's learning a new language." No one said anything else. The session ended early, but for once, the silence wasn't empty. He didn't change overnight. He never really did things that way. There were no grand transformations, just slow softenings, like frozen ground, remembering it was once earth. After that first touch, the one Emma offered with the same reverence, someone might hand over a secret. Something old in him began to shift, not disappear, not heal, shift. He started to meet her eyes, not always, not steadily, but long enough for her to believe he saw her, not just around her. And in return, her sentence that day, the one about him learning a new language, grew into something larger, because they were dot together, one syllable, one step, one breath at a time. He didn't respond much to the playful kids who came with energy bottled in grins. When they squealed and skipped and tugged brushes through manes, Chance kept to his quiet corner. But the children who didn't know how to be loud anymore, who flinched when someone laughed too hard, those were the ones that drifted toward him, or maybe were pulled. There was no training, no conditioning. He just stood for them, like Emma had taught him how. The therapists noticed. They didn't etch it into reports right away. It felt too fragile, like naming it might break the spell, but the patterns held. Something about Chance responded to hesitation, to quaking fingers and quiet breath. Most horses grow uneasy around unpredictability, but Chance steadied. He was never pushy, never dramatic. He simply stayed. The children came one by one. A boy who refused to touch the ground unless wrapped in blankets found himself seated, cross-legged beside Chance's stall, whispering nonsense only the horse seemed to hear. A girl who hadn't allowed a single hug in over a year leaned against Chance's side, forehead pressed just above his knee, and breathed like someone remembering how. Each time, Chance moved carefully, lowered his head just enough to be level. Not smaller, but equal. And in the steadiness of his presence, something universal translated. A psychologist, observing one session, murmured, "He's more intuitive than some adults." Another, after weeks of watching Chance interact with the therapy kids, looked up from her notes and said, mostly to the room, It's like he resonated. Like what? Someone asked. Like those tuning forks you strike, she answered. Something about sorrow hums, and he picks up the frequency. No one laughed, because it didn't feel romanticized. It felt true. Emma continued her visits by. Then, Chance didn't need coaxing to approach. He met her at the stall. Sometimes he nickered low, almost as if to greet her. She continued bringing books, though now she held them in one hand while stroking his mane with the other. Her sentences grew, paragraphs formed. She began talking to volunteers before and after sessions, her voice always hushed but present. When asked what changed, she just shrugged. Maybe my sadness found somewhere to go. Joanne watched all of this like one watches a sunrise, inching over the horizon without demand. Healing has its own clock, she once said. Ours just ticks too loud to hear it sometimes. Eventually, Emma was joined by others who wanted to read nearby. Not all of them managed it. Some cried, some paced, but Chance held space. The staff, once cautious, slowly began guiding others toward Chance during their own silent spirals. The boy who bit his own hand when anxious, the girl who hadn't been touched by another being. In 2 years, the teen who hadn't laughed since his mother disappeared. They didn't ride him, they rarely brushed him, they simply shared his circle of stillness. Some brought apples, some just breath, and he offered presents, unjudging, undemanding, undeterred. One volunteer said it best, without realizing, he's not just patient, he's permission. And somewhere in the symmetry of those visits, of those soft exchanges where no words were needed and still all of them spoke, the ranch decided something quietly permanent. They didn't call him therapy trained. That didn't feel right. He wasn't a horse with a job. He was a being with a gift, so they made it official in the only gentle, true way they could. A small plaque nailed beside his stall, simple words, hand-carved by one of the teens who found home. Here it read, he needed a voice, so she gave him hers, and beneath that, just one name, Chance. He became part of the place, not just in presence, but in pattern. The kind of familiarity that made volunteers smile without realizing, that made children glance instinctively toward his stall as they arrived, hoping he was there, hoping he still chose to stay. Emma kept coming, less because she needed to, and more because something in her had begun rooting there, in the soil of shared silence, in the rhythm of hoofbeats, softer than memory. Her words came easier now, not always fluently, but without fear. She laughed. Once, loudly, summer sunlight caught in her shoulder-length curls, and Chance turned his head when he heard it, as if noting a new tone in her, one he hadn't yet catalogued. She reached for his mane and whispered something none of the staff caught. But he did. After that, other children were paired with him more intentionally, only the quiet ones, only the ones whose grief had no clean edges, the kind you can't explain to adults because they want to fix it, and some things can't be fixed. Only Chance held those things. He didn't pace or prance or neigh when they came. He just stepped near, like noticing, like saying, I still see you, even when you don't want to be seen, and somehow, that was enough to begin, he started, to play in ways that were almost unnoticeable unless you lived alongside it, nosing blankets off the stall rail, tossing the old feed tub sideways like it had offended him, rolling once so dramatically in the morning sun that everyone clapped, and he didn't flee the noise. He rested there, eyes half closed, peace outlined in dust. a local therapist began bringing adult clients to veterans mostly, seeking PTSD support but uneasy around groups or anyone who asked them to speak. Many asked not to engage, just to be nearby when he was calm. He always was. One man, mid-60s, had survived 3 deployments and 3 divorces. Said he hadn't touched another living thing in 5 years. Sat in the paddock with Chance for nearly an hour. Didn't reach out, just breathed. When he finally did lift a hand, brushing the side of Chance's neck with the weightless caution of someone afraid of breaking something important. The horse leaned in, anchored the man like a tether point. After, the man admitted, "I didn't think I deserved softness anymore." Chance didn't offer absolution, just space. The rescue ranch grew. Volunteers who once arrived for school credits now came early and stayed late. Donation letters began referencing Chance by name, stories whispered by word. The mouth reached wider audiences. Joanne eventually made it official. She launched the initiative that had been sitting half-built in her notebooks for a year. The Chance Project Community Horse-Assisted Nurturing Compassion for everyone. It wasn't designed as therapy, not formally. It was designed as sanctuary for horses, yes, but also for the fractured places in people that didn't need to be repaired so much as recognized. The wordless hurts, the ones that could live beside kindness, if not cured by it. Children came from across the state, some from institutions and foster systems, so overwhelmed it took hours for them to say their names. One boy, barely 10, hadn't made eye contact with another soul in months. Yet he watched Chance, then watched him again, then whispered something to him, lips barely moving, for 20 minutes, until Joanne had to gently tell him it was time to head back. "I'll come next week," he said. It was 3 words more than he'd said since arriving at the shelter. The impact wasn't in headlines. It was in the slow repair of things no one else noticed had broken. Emma writing a letter to her future self and signing it, still becoming a teenage girl reading aloud for kids younger than her after months of silence. A shy child tracing the plaque on Chance's stall with his fingers, smooth and cautious, as if touching the story would somehow let him belong to it, not as a guest, but as someone who understood. And always the horse stood quietly, not offering answers, but never turning away from the questions. He moved slower now. His gait, once cautious, was becoming deliberate. Each step a quiet negotiation with joints that remembered too much. Winter came early that year, the kind that dusted everything in white, as if trying to soften the truth of endings it couldn't prevent. Joanne noticed it first one morning. He didn't come to the post as quickly, didn't lift his head at the usual sound of the grain bucket. When she brushed him, he didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. Just stood. There was weariness in his stillness now, not fear, just inevitability. The vet came by a few days later, listened, looked, felt along the spine, the knees, the hocks. "Arthritis," she said gently. "Likely old injuries resurfacing, ones he'd learned to carry for years." Joanne nodded. He had carried so much. They changed the bedding in his stall to layered softness, heated the walls, gave him space near the sun in midday and shelter from the wind at dusk. He didn't protest the changes. He simply rested more, and the ranch, as if sensing the shift, grew quieter around his stall. Old stories began to surface again. Volunteers remembered their first apple, their first silence beside him. The boy who read him poems came back, older now, voice deeper, still soft. He brought a new poem, read it, standing just outside the stall. Chance stayed near the bars, ears flicking, eyes half closed. Emma came to 19 now. Taller, stronger, her voice no longer afraid of its own echo. But when she sat beside him again, she folded to the ground like she'd never left, as if his ribs still held part of the silence they once navigated together. Joanne stood at a distance. That day, watched as Emma rested her forehead against his chest, not asking for anything, just ... listening to the slow rhythm of breath, slower than she remembered. "You gave me back my voice," she whispered. He didn't move, didn't need to. Grief, she had learned, makes a home in us, not to stay heavy forever, but to etch something in the bone, something sacred, something true. And because of him, she knew not everything had to be spoken to be real. That night, after closing, Joanne left the barn door open just a little longer. The stars were out without apology, and the whisper of winter slid through the fields like breath. She sat on a stool 2 stalls down, didn't speak, just stayed. When she returned in the morning, he was lying down, one leg tucked beneath, the other out, head turned toward the sunrise that hadn't yet finished rising, blanket draped across his back, one eye still half open, as if he had just blinked into sleep and chosen not to wake. No struggle, no cry, just a breathless peace, stretched across fleece and straw. The ranch didn't erupt in noise that day. It hushed like the world paused, ... just long enough to notice the absence of something too quiet to ever demand being seen, but to present, to miss when it left. They left his stall untouched, no sweeping, no refilling, for 30 days. A candle glowed near the gate. Children brought notes, drawings. One whispered thank you. No one needed to say what had happened. They just felt it, and that, somehow, was enough. The stall stayed empty, not in a way that begged attention, just the kind that made others walk slower as they passed, glancing in with quiet reflex, forgetting for a second, then remembering, like checking for a star you used to know, only to find sky. Joanne didn't speak much those days. She came in with the sunrise, same as always, still moved through chores, checked water lines, brushed the ponies. But when she passed his paddock, her hands stopped moving. Only for a moment. Others noticed, but they didn't comment. Some silences you don't disturb. Children kept arriving, new stories, fresh wounds, some still wearing the weight of things left unsaid. And even without him, something in the air around that stall ... held. One boy set a paper flower in the grain bucket. Another laid down a toy horse he'd carried for years, saying simply, for him, so he has a friend. The world didn't slow for his absence. Hooves still clattered in morning runs. Dogs still barked at fluttering birds. Hay still fell in golden slants through slatted sun. But it was all softer somehow, as if they'd all agreed, gently, wordlessly, to make space for the echo he left behind. Emma came back a month later, not for therapy, just to sit. Older now, voice strong. But when she reached the stall, it caught somewhere behind her ribs. She didn't cry, she just placed a folded envelope on the gate. Later, Joanne found it. It wasn't addressed. Inside, it simply read, "He showed me that being broken wasn't the end of the story, and maybe not even the worst part, because you can still listen when you're broken. Sometimes even better." The plaque still hung where it always had. He needed a voice, so she gave him hers. It caught the amber light now in a different way, not brighter, not dimmer, just ... truer. The chance project kept growing. More horses eased into postures of comfort. Not all of them became what he was. Some were playful, some curious, some goofy, even sweet, but none were quite him. They didn't try to make them be. You can't train stillness like that. You can only witness it. There's a rhythm. Animals know a tempo. Humans forget. It's nearer to soil and sky than language and rules. Chance remembered it, that deep listening rhythm, and by remembering, he let others recall it too. Kids came and went. Some left healed, some just ... less afraid. Some stayed long enough to become helpers. Adults with soft edges, eyes that met you without invading. The kind of people who understood the weight of a secret before it was told. They always paused at his stall, even when it was quiet. Especially then Joanne was asked once by a visiting journalist, curious to write something about the miracle. Horse, how exactly did you train him to be so good with trauma? She looked up, one hand resting on the gate. Her smile was small, straight-lined. He wasn't trained, he just ... chose to stay. The journalist wrote something else instead. One line stood out. They quoted Joanne without meaning to. Some souls don't heal by being fixed, but by being witnessed. Time passed, visitors came. Every now and then, someone would walk to the fence line, where a cedar sign now bore his name. Not flashy, barely carved chants beneath it. He heard the things we were too tired to explain. A child once asked if horses go to heaven. Joanne didn't answer directly. She just pointed to the paddock. 2 fields where new horses wandered, some still wary, some learning to trust, and then said, sometimes they stay here a little longer. In the quiet parts, just beyond the reach of names, where their hoofprints make the earth remember, and the air listens just a little longer. Because when a creature like that leaves ... they don't disappear, they echo.